You are standing in the meticulously clean, brightly lit corridor of a modern condominium building, clutching a single sheet of standard white printer paper in your right hand. Your knuckles are white. Your heart is hammering against your ribs in a heavy, erratic rhythm. The piece of paper you are holding is a formally drafted provincial eviction notice. Specifically, the document required to terminate a residential tenancy because you, the property owner, intend to sell the unit. And you slide the paper underneath the heavy wooden door of Unit 412, the investment property you purchased 4 years ago during the peak of the real estate frenzy. You step back, let out a long, exhausted breath, and you genuinely believe that the nightmare is finally coming to an end. For the past 18 months, you have been slowly, mathematically suffocating. The Bank of Canada relentlessly increased their policy rate, and dragging your variable rate mortgage payment from a manageable $2,000 a month to an absolutely crippling $4,000 a month. The rent you collect from the tenant living inside that unit is strictly capped by provincial rent control legislation at $2,200. Every single month, you are hemorrhaging $1,800 in pure, unrecoverable cash just to subsidize the housing of a complete stranger. You have drained your emergency savings, you have maxed out your unsecured lines of credit, and you have finally accepted the bitter mathematical reality that you can no longer afford to hold this depreciating asset. You have made the painful, agonizing decision to liquidate the property, pay off the primary lending institution, and desperately try to walk away with whatever tiny fraction of your original down payment remains. You believe that sliding this official legal document under the door is the definitive first step toward your financial liberation. You believe that the legal system, with its clear rules and defined notice periods, will protect your fundamental property rights. You are completely, catastrophically incorrect. That piece of paper is not an exit strategy. It is the catalyst for a hostage negotiation. You have not initiated a standard legal procedure. You have just walked completely unprotected into the extortion mill, and the person sitting on the couch on the other side of that door is about to legally strip you of your last remaining $30,000. Welcome back to Canada Property Watch. Over the past few months, we have relentlessly documented the systemic, calculated destruction of the Canadian middle class. We have exposed the algorithmic brutality of the banking sector, the silent wealth extraction of the basement audit, and the terrifying reality of the insurance blacklist. But today, we are going to investigate a mechanism of financial violence that is so entirely normalized, so deeply embedded in the legal framework of this country, that the mainstream media refers to it as a standard business negotiation. We are going to expose the highly lucrative, perfectly legal shadow industry of tenant extortion. We are going to detail the exact, almost step-by-step, process by which opportunistic occupants weaponize the paralyzed provincial tribunal systems to hold your primary physical asset for ransom. We will break down the chilling psychology of the professional tenant, an individual who actively hunts for financially distressed, over-leveraged amateur landlords to exploit. We will explain the devastating mechanics of the vacant possession clause, and the specific legal requirement that makes your property completely unsellable on the open market and forces you into total submission. And finally, we will reveal the brutal, inescapable mathematics of the cash for keys transaction, the agonizing final act where you are forced to hand over a certified bank draft for tens of thousands of dollars to a hostile occupant just to regain control of your own legal property and satisfy the aggressive demands of your primary bank. The era of the passive, a secure real estate investment is completely finished. The legal architecture governing property rights has been fundamentally inverted, and the penalty for misunderstanding this new reality is absolute, irreversible financial ruin. To fully comprehend the sheer scale and the ruthless efficiency of the trap you have just activated, you must first completely abandon the outdated, comforting illusion that the law exists to protect the property owner from theft. And in the specific context of Canadian residential tenancy law, the physical contract you signed, the deed registered in your name at the Provincial Land Titles Office, and the massive mortgage you hold with a major financial institution are entirely subordinate to the statutory rights of the individual physically occupying the space. When you slip that eviction notice, under the door of Unit 412, you assumed the tenant would read the document. Recognize your lawful right to sell your own property and begin packing their boxes to vacate within the legally mandated 60 days. Instead, the tenant picks up the piece of paper, reads it carefully, and smiles. They do not experience panic. They experience opportunity. They do not begin looking for a new apartment. They immediately forward a photograph of your eviction notice to a specialized paralegal who operates entirely within the gray margins of the housing tribunal system. Within 24 hours, you receive a highly formalized, coldly written email from the tenant or their legal representative. The message completely ignores the 60-day deadline you provided. Instead, it informs you that the tenant formally disputes the eviction notice. They declare their absolute legal right to remain in the property and demand a formal hearing before the Provincial Residential Housing Tribunal to test the validity of your intent to sell. And this is the exact moment the psychological terror begins, because you suddenly realize you are no longer dealing with a mutually respectful business arrangement. You are dealing with a weaponized legal strategy. The tenant knows something that you, the amateur investor, are only just beginning to violently discover. They know that the Provincial Housing Tribunal system is fundamentally, completely, and perhaps permanently broken due to years of systemic underfunding, bureaucratic mismanagement, and an overwhelming surge in housing disputes driven by the national cost of living crisis. The tribunal is entirely paralyzed by a historic multi-year backlog of active cases. The tenant knows with absolute mathematical certainty that obtaining a preliminary hearing date to simply present your eviction notice before a government adjudicator will take a minimum of 8 to 14 excruciating months. By simply sending that single email disputing your notice, and the tenant has successfully purchased a minimum of 1 entire year of guaranteed, uninterrupted occupancy in your property. But the trap is vastly more sophisticated and deeply malicious than a simple delay tactic. The moment the tenant legally disputes the eviction and demands a tribunal hearing, the traditional power dynamic is entirely shattered. The tenant recognizes that you are bleeding cash, and they know that you are currently subsidizing their existence by $1,800 every single month because your variable rate mortgage has completely detached from reality. And because they are now actively engaged in a legal dispute with you, they make a calculated, devastating tactical decision. They immediately stop paying you rent altogether. You must understand the profound, paralyzing helplessness of this specific scenario. Your tenant is now living in your million-dollar asset for absolutely free. You cannot legally change the locks on the heavy wooden door of Unit 412. You cannot physically enter the unit to forcefully remove their belongings. You cannot contact the utility companies to cut off their electricity, their water, or their internet connection. If you attempt to execute any of these entirely logical, common-sense actions to protect your property, you will be immediately charged with severe provincial offenses, subjected to massive financial penalties, and potentially face criminal harassment charges. The local police department will absolutely not help you. If you call them to report that someone is living in your house without paying, they will inform you that it is strictly a civil matter and order you to leave the premises. You are legally, physically, and financially forced to subsidize the housing and the daily utility consumption of a hostile, non-paying occupant while your own financial world rapidly burns to the ground. The tenant is using the structural failure of the government tribunal system as an impenetrable shield, and they are using your massive compounding mortgage debt as a weapon to bleed you into total submission. Desperate to escape the crushing monthly losses, you decide to proceed with the sale of the property regardless of the tenant's hostile presence. You contact a local real estate agent, sign the listing agreement, and place the property on the open market. You naively believe that a savvy investor or a patient first-time home buyer will purchase the unit and assume the legal burden of evicting the tenant. This is where the sheer, unyielding brutality of the real estate market completely crushes your remaining hopes. that your real estate agent attempts to schedule property viewings for potential buyers, but the tenant legally requires 24 hours of written notice for every single entry. The tenant begins utilizing every conceivable legal loophole to deny access. They claim they are severely ill and cannot leave the unit. They claim the proposed viewing times interfere with their fundamental right to reasonable enjoyment of the property. When your real estate agent finally manages to force a viewing, and the potential buyers walk into a deliberately manufactured nightmare. The tenant is sitting on the couch in their underwear, the television is blaring at maximum volume, the sink is overflowing with rotting dishes, and there is a subtle, unidentifiable foul odor deliberately lingering in the air. The potential buyers, a young couple looking for their first home, immediately turn around and walk out. They will absolutely not purchase a property containing a hostile, entrenched occupant, and they will not assume the massive legal liability, the unknown financial costs, and the endless psychological stress of a tribunal battle they did not start. Your property sits dead on the multiple listing service for 30 days, then 60 days, then 120 days. The only offers you ever receive are incredibly insulting, predatory bids coming exclusively from specialized cash-rich corporate investors who specifically target distressed landlords. And these sophisticated investors demand a minimum 40% discount off the actual market value of your property to compensate for the extreme legal risk, the immense holding costs, and the time delay of inheriting your hostile tenant. You cannot possibly accept these lowball offers because a 40% discount mathematically guarantees that the final sale price will not even be enough to cover the outstanding balance of your primary bank mortgage. If you accept the offer, you will have to write a check to the bank for $50,000 just to close the transaction. You are completely, hopelessly trapped. You cannot sell the property, you cannot evict the tenant, you cannot collect rent, and the aggressive monthly mortgage payments are relentlessly draining your final reserves of capital. Then, the final, most devastating phase of the trap is initiated. You receive another communication from the tenant's paralegal. It is not an apology. And it is not an offer to resume paying rent. It is a highly formal proposal for a mutual agreement to terminate the tenancy. The tenant is offering to voluntarily sign a legal document relinquishing their statutory right to occupy the unit, and they promise to hand over the physical keys and vacate the premises within 30 days. But this voluntary surrender comes with a highly specific, non-negotiable price tag. The tenant demands a certified bank draft in the exact amount of $30,000. Completely tax-free, payable immediately upon their departure. This is the extortion mill operating at its absolute peak efficiency. It is entirely, flawlessly legal. It is commonly referred to in the real estate industry as cash for keys, a polite, sanitized term used to describe a transaction that is fundamentally identical to paying a ransom to a hostage taker. Your initial reaction is profound. Explosive moral outrage. You are absolutely furious. You scream at your computer monitor. You cannot fathom the sheer audacity of a system that allows a non-paying occupant to legally demand $30,000 of your hard-earned, heavily taxed money just to return your own property to you. You contact a highly specialized real estate litigation attorney, fully prepared to spend thousands of dollars to fight this blatant injustice in the highest courts. But the attorney does not share your moral outrage. The attorney looks at your specific financial details, slowly shakes their head, and delivers the cold, unfiltered, mathematical truth. The attorney explains that you must completely separate your emotions from the mathematics of the situation. You are currently losing $1,800 every single month just to carry the mortgage. If you choose to fight the tenant at the paralyzed provincial tribunal, you will wait a minimum of 12 months for a hearing. During that year, you will bleed $21,600 in pure carrying costs. You will also pay the attorney a minimum of $5,000 in specialized legal fees to represent you at the hearing. Furthermore, during that 12-month waiting period, the hostile tenant is living unmonitored in your million-dollar asset. They have the time and the motivation to inflict massive and deliberate physical damage to the property. They can pour concrete down the plumbing drains, smash the expensive quartz countertops, destroy the hardwood flooring, and severely damage the electrical panel. By the time the sheriff finally arrives to physically remove them a year from now, you could be facing $40,000 in required restorative construction costs just to make the property sellable. And finally, the attorney points out that the real estate market is currently experiencing a severe high interest rate correction. If you wait 12 months to sell the property, the overall market value of the condo could easily drop by another $50,000. The attorney slides a piece of paper across the desk. It is a mathematical breakdown of your absolute destruction. If you fight for your moral principles and rely on the government tribunal system, your total estimated financial loss over the next year, including carrying costs, legal fees, potential property damage, and market depreciation, is mathematically calculated to be over $110,000. Suddenly, the tenant's completely outrageous, highly offensive demand for $30,000 in cash is no longer extortion. It is the cheapest, most logical, and most mathematically sound business decision available to you. The system has been so perfectly engineered and so thoroughly weaponized against the property owner that paying the ransom is literally the only way to avoid total, irrecoverable bankruptcy. The mathematics completely crush your moral outrage. You have absolutely no leverage. You are a hostage, and you have finally realized that you must pay the kidnapper. You execute the agonizing, deeply humiliating transaction. You drive to your primary bank branch, feeling physically nauseous. And you withdraw the last $30,000 you possess from an unsecured, high-interest personal line of credit. You ask the teller to print a certified bank draft made completely payable to the tenant who has ruined your financial life. You meet the tenant and their paralegal in the empty corridor outside Unit 412. The tenant signs the standard government form mutually agreeing to terminate the tenancy. You hand over the certified bank draft. The tenant does not look ashamed. They do not apologize for the months of extreme psychological torture. They carefully examine the bank draft, place it securely into their jacket pocket, hand you a single brass key, and walk silently toward the elevator. They have successfully utilized the structural paralysis of the government tribunal system to legally extract $30,000 of your equity entirely tax-free without producing a single ounce of economic value. They will likely move to another rental unit in a different city and execute the exact same highly lucrative, completely legal strategy against another unsuspecting, over-leveraged amateur landlord. You walk into the empty, echoing condominium unit. The air is stale. There are scuff marks on the walls and deep scratches on the flooring, but the physical structure is largely intact. You immediately contact your real estate agent and instruct them to list the property for sale. I'm highlighting the crucial, highly coveted phrase vacant possession guaranteed in the public listing. Because the property is entirely empty and free of legal entanglements, a legitimate buyer finally purchases the unit. But as you sit in the pristine office of your real estate closing lawyer weeks later, reviewing the final statement of adjustments, the brutal, comprehensive reality of your financial execution is fully revealed. The property sold for $850,000. The primary bank aggressively extracts their $810,000 to clear the outstanding mortgage principal and the associated penalty fees. The real estate agents who facilitated the transaction extract $40,000 in standard, non-negotiable commissions. And the tenant, the hostile occupant who stopped paying rent, successfully extracted the final $30,000 of your remaining equity through the legalized extortion of the cash for keys transaction. The entire financial architecture of your long-term investment strategy has been completely, perfectly vaporized. You dedicated years of your life saving the initial down payment. You sacrificed your disposable income. You assumed massive, terrifying amounts of leverage, and you believed you were building generational wealth for your family. But at the exact moment of liquidation, the interconnected systems of the Canadian real estate market operated with flawless and mechanical precision to ensure that absolutely everyone was paid except you. The primary lending institution recovered their deployed capital. The real estate professionals collected their percentage-based commissions. The professional tenant secured a massive tax-free windfall. And you, the individual who assumed 100% of the financial risk, are left sitting in a lawyer's office holding a piece of paper that mathematically proves your equity has been reduced to absolute zero. And this is the absolute terrifying reality of the modern Canadian housing market. The legal framework governing property ownership has been entirely decoupled from common sense and fundamental fairness. The system actively rewards opportunistic occupants who understand how to weaponize bureaucratic paralysis, and it relentlessly punishes the middle-class property owner who foolishly believes that holding a deed guarantees control over the asset. If you are currently sitting in your home and were struggling to afford the compounding interest payments on an investment property, and you are quietly hoping that you can simply sell the unit to escape the crushing mathematical pressure, you are walking entirely blindfolded toward a financial cliff. You must fundamentally audit your own risk exposure right now before your tenant decides to initiate the extortion protocol. Do not rely on the government tribunal system to protect your assets. And because the system is the exact weapon being used against you. Subscribe to Canada Property Watch immediately. We will continue to ruthlessly dissect the exact mechanics of the financial system, reading the fine print that the real estate agents, the mortgage brokers, and the mainstream media completely ignore. We will expose the algorithms, track the audits, and provide you with the cold, unfiltered, mathematically precise truth required to navigate the total collapse of the middle class. Stay vigilant, stay completely informed, and protect your remaining assets from the extortion mill.